Welcome to the GSMC Business News Podcast, the show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. If you're looking for a podcast to keep you informed and ahead of the game in business, the GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Welcome. You are listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Maya, and I'll be your host for today. Thank you so much for listening in, you guys. I'm super happy to have you guys back again. So we have a lot of really interesting things to talk about today. There's a lot of innovation going on and a little bit of conflict maybe. A lot of what we're going to talk about in today's episode is going to be technological advancement, which is super fun to me because there are so many new things to talk about that we have not seen before. There's several stories that we're about to talk about here that are brand new technology or relatively new technology that most of us are not very familiar with. So I want to go ahead and start off. The first thing that I want to talk about is a really cool thing that Samsung is beginning to introduce, which is sort of a holographic looking keyboard for your smartphone. So let me describe what's going on with this development here. Basically, the goal is to allow a person to be able to type like a QWERTY keyboard, like a laptop style keyboard is what that means, and be able to type in this style with your hands on a surface, on a flat surface, and type just like you were using a keyboard, but that typing translates to your phone. So Samsung developed a technology that allows you to do this without having a separate keyboard. So essentially what it does is it utilizes the selfie camera and AI technology together to analyze your finger movements as you type, kind of in a hypothetical sense, but you type just as you would with a keyboard on some surface. The phone or device will be able to watch your finger movements and convert these movements into QWERTY inputs. So it will be able to analyze and read your movements and just basically type for you without actually pushing any buttons. Samsung says that it will not require any extra hardware, so it'll most likely be sort of like an app or something that you install on your device so that you can utilize the feature of selfie type. It will also be compatible with a wide range of smartphones, also tablets, and even laptops. I'm not really sure why you would need to use this for your laptop. The only thing I could imagine is perhaps if you just have an old laptop that doesn't function correctly, maybe you have a couple of keys that aren't working, or maybe the entire keyboard isn't working at all. Or maybe you just have an uncomfortable laptop and you just don't like the way that it feels ergonomically with your hands, so you have the option to use a secondary surface and type that way. I think it's kind of respectable also that they are allowing for this technology to be compatible with a wide variety of devices, so they're not limiting it to just Samsung devices. It looks like it's going to be available for a broad spectrum of different kinds of phones, tablets, and laptops. So this is a good move on their end. It's probably smart not only because they can kind of market their own brand and market their creativity and their technology and their innovation, but it also just allows for more user-friendly approach towards things. A lot of other technology, like we've seen with Apple, for example, you have to use Apple chargers and Apple headphones and Apple everything in order to make it work, or in order to allow it to function the way that it's supposed to. So we can see that Samsung is not coming at it from the same approach. So when are we going to see the selfie type technology being released? Well, in order to note that, we kind of have to take a step back. In 2012, Samsung introduced what they call the C Lab, which stands for Creative Lab. And this is basically a program that was initiated to allow their employees to work in groups, to create creative groups together who work together to create new innovations, new startups, and just new technology that they feel is going to be beneficial to the company or to the users. So since 2012, these C Lab groups have been producing new ideas, new projects, new startups to showcase at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show. And this is an annual event Samsung is present for every year. So in 2020, for the Consumer Electronics Show of this year, it looks like is when we're going to see selfie type being showcased for the first time. And selfie type is not going to be the first or the only, it's not going to be the only technology that Samsung is presenting at CES. There's also going to be 8 other projects coming from the C Lab groups. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the other 8 projects, but we'll go through a couple of them just so you can see really what they're working with. And they're really pushing the boundaries of innovation right now. They have some really interesting things coming up. And some of them are things that you wouldn't anticipate coming from Samsung. You think of Samsung as a company that produces cell phones and televisions and things like that. But some of these ideas are so far outside of what I would have anticipated from Samsung. So the first one is called Hyler. That's spelled Hyler, Hyler. And essentially it is a highlighter that converts text into a digital document. So it connects to an app on your smartphone. It, I guess, theoretically is going to look like a highlighter or a pen, and you basically will trace over words that are on a paper document. And when you trace over these words, it will convert those letters into a digital document on your phone. That's so cool to me and definitely useful for students. That's the first thing that came to mind when I saw this was taking notes. When you're reading something and you want to create an outline or you have some report to do and you need to just quickly get notes from things, half of the time that you spend taking notes is physically writing the words down. So if you have something like this, you can take notes and process information so much faster. Now, I know that there's a lot of reports out there and also just user opinions, I suppose, that say that writing things down is pretty essential to memorization and to long-term memory storage. So I don't know how this is actually going to be perceived as far as memory retention, but just for the sheer sense of productivity and efficiency, and just the fact that you can do things so quickly like this, I love the Hyler. I think this is going to be really interesting. And if it does come out as something that's available to the public, I'll probably be one of the first to purchase it. The second one is called Beacon. And this one is spelled differently as well. It's B-E-C-O-N, Beacon. And Beacon is really interesting. It is one of those that I was talking about that is not what you would expect from Samsung. But Beacon performs scalp analysis on the user's hair. And the reason why they developed this was to help prevent hair loss. I don't know why they actually came up with this. This might have been like a personal venture for somebody who was on the C Lab team and maybe they were personally experiencing hair loss or know people who were experiencing hair loss, etc. And they just really wanted to delve into this world and see what they could do about it. But the intention of the technology is to detect conditions of the scalp that might contribute to hair loss either in the present or the future. So by doing this, they're going to help people to kind of get this analysis done without, going to the doctor and getting a prescription and all these things. You can go ahead and analyze your own scalp, I suppose, and figure out how you might be able to prevent your hair loss. So another technology that they're going to be presenting at the CES of 2020 is called Sunnyside. This one is pretty mind-boggling to me. Sunnyside somehow produces or claims to produce artificial sunlight. I don't know how this is possible, and actually I was just having this conversation recently with someone who asked me how, is it possible to get vitamin D or any type of benefits from sunlight from an indoor light? I don't actually know the answer to that question, but apparently Sunnyside can accomplish that goal. by producing artificial sunlight and allowing people to synthesize vitamin D without going outside and gathering all of the harmful effects that the sun might cause, like aging and sunburn and damaging UV rays. So theoretically, it's going to be able to give you all the benefits of sunlight. Maybe it can help you with your indoor plants. I don't know. But it does not have all of the negative effects of the sun. Digital Street is a website that discusses technology, science, and education. And Digital Street says the Sunnyside, quote, seems like a lightning device. So that's pretty interesting. I really want to see what this one looks like and if it's actually effective in giving you all the good without the bad of the sun. For me, though, I'm kind of old school. I know that there's a lot of benefit and a lot of damage coming from the sun, but I just can't help it. I love being outside. So the last thing is kind of hand in hand with the Sunnyside device, and I actually didn't find a name for this one, but only a description. And it looks like it is a new sensor that detects UV light. So it'll allow people to see how much harmful UV rays they're exposed to on a daily basis. So if you spend a lot of time outside, like myself, then you'll be able to see how much damage you're actually getting from being in those UV rays. So there's a lot coming out from Samsung this year, and it'll be really interesting to keep up with this CES of 2020. I would love to take a look at that. When it comes about, you can be sure that we'll be talking about it on the show. So keep an eye out for that because there's a lot of really, really cool things coming out at CES 2020, especially from Samsung. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I want to talk about the next iPhone. I know it's a little bit premature and everyone is already, kind of just getting used to the iPhone 11, the iPhone 11 Pro, the Pro Max, all of this stuff, and we're just getting used to all of those. But as we all know, there's going to be another iPhone coming up in September. So we're going to take a look at some of the projections for the next iPhone. Hang tight for this commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Are you looking for a podcast that gives you all of the latest news from the world of finance? Then check out the GSMC Financial News Podcast. We'll delve into the ups and downs of the stock market, changes in the economy, and news from the world of real estate and technology. From breaking news on the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, or the overseas market, to updates on the bond market, if there's money to be made, we'll cover it on the GSMC Financial News Podcast.
Welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Maya. So we just went over several new, very exciting innovations coming out of Samsung's C Lab. All of these things will be presented at the CES, that is Consumer Electronics Show, coming up in this, sometime this year in 2020. And like I said, when that does come up, we'll definitely be letting you guys know a little bit more about these innovations and what to expect, how many of these things are going to actually take fruition, and what other companies are participating in the Consumer Electronics Show and what might they be offering and bringing to the table. So that being said, we are going to move on next to the new iPhone. We just got over or got through a new release of the iPhone 11. I personally just got the iPhone 11 and I've only had it for a couple of weeks at this point. But it has been around since September, and as we all know, maybe you don't, but a lot of people know it is pretty common knowledge at this point, after so many years, that there is an anticipated iPhone release September of every year. So, of course, for this year, we already have a couple of projections and things that we can anticipate coming out of the iPhone 12 family. However, although we do have the anticipation and the excitement of the iPhone 12 coming about, there are a couple of other things up Apple's sleeve that may be worth taking a look at and perhaps even more interesting than the iPhone 12. I know. Something more interesting than a new iPhone? How is it possible? Well, let's talk about the iPhone 12 very briefly. First off, we know that it's going to have the 5G connectivity. It is going to have the new A14 processor, and it will likely have more memory. The iPhone 11 already has a substantial package of memory included, but it looks like they're going big for the iPhone 12, so it's going to be an even more substantial memory basis for that phone. However, by the end of this quarter, we are anticipating the release of the new iPhone SE. Now, we had another iPhone SE that was released after the iPhone 5S, and the SE was basically just an upgrade from the 5S and was intended to be essentially an upgraded model, but that was in its own kind of family of iPhones. So following that SE, now we are looking towards an SE2. So currently the name for the SE2 is kind of up in the air. That is the current name for it, but there are some some projections that the name might change to iPhone 9. And the reason for this is because it uses the same design language as the iPhone 8. So it's essentially a branch off of the iPhone 8. And if you recall, there was never an iPhone 9. We jumped straight to iPhone 10. So I don't know how I feel about this one. I feel like it's kind of awkward if they were to call it the iPhone 9, and I really hope that they don't, because I do think that this would impact their sales. Because we are already at the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, and we are already anticipating the iPhone 12, it doesn't make sense in my head for it to go backwards to the iPhone 9. I think that it would make people feel like they were getting a lesser iPhone, especially with this culture of fast fashion and everything always needing to be the upgraded, newest, most interesting, brand new thing that you can get. I think if you were to release an iPhone that was given a title that appears as if it's an older model, it would kind of push people away from purchasing that phone, even though it's a new phone. So I'm kind of reluctant to say that they would title it the iPhone 9. If they do, I'll be kind of surprised. But we'll keep an eye on it and see what they decide. Like I said, it's going to be coming out by the end of this quarter, so we'll know very soon what they decide to do with it as far as the name. Anyways, this iPhone 9 or SE2 might end up being the hottest new iPhone of 2020. Why is this? That is purely because of the price. So the iPhone 11 is starting around the $700 mark, but the iPhone SE2 is looking at around $400 to $500. That is a huge difference from $700. For example, if you're a family and you need to buy 2 new iPhones for your 2 teenagers who desperately need iPhones, then would you rather purchase 2 $400 phones or 2 $700 phones? Because it's a difference between $800 and $1,400. It just makes a big difference when you're looking at a couple $100 per iPhone. So that being said, when you change your prices so dramatically, it opens up your consumer basis to a lot different or a lot more different kinds of people. More people could now afford an iPhone than could afford the iPhone 11. So the percent margin for the SE2 as far as Apple's profits go might be about the same as that of the iPhone 11. But of course, with the lower price, we're looking at a lower dollar profit per phone. And it might be significantly lower considering that the price is so much lower. So what does this tell you about Apple's strategy? Are they just okay with making less money? Because I don't think that that's actually the case. What we're looking at is a change in their strategy. They're no longer going to be focusing on purely selling expensive phones, but we're looking at a shift in their strategy towards subscription services. We have iCloud, which you can purchase. Every phone usually comes with a little bit of iCloud storage when you create an iCloud account. But you can always upgrade. And if you are an iPhone user, you have probably had that option come up on your phone. When you start to use up all of your storage, they say, okay, you can upgrade and purchase more storage. Then you have Apple Music, We're also pushing in towards Apple TV, etc. So there's all these different subscription services that allow for people to not just purchase a phone, but then continue putting money into Apple in other avenues. So when you increase the number of people who can afford an iPhone in the first place by lowering the cost of the iPhone, then you are increasing your subscription basis. Now you have more people who need to upgrade their iCloud storage and who start using Apple Music, etc. So their strategy is no longer just to sell expensive phones, but to encourage just consistent payments coming in towards Apple. You might end up paying the same amount to Apple overall by the time you've upgraded your iCloud storage and subscribed to Apple Music. Forbes says, quote, "Inside Apple, a tipping point has been reached. The power of iPhone sales is no longer paramount. There's a new priority in town that wants to try and find success," end quote. And by this tipping point, it's exactly what I was just talking about. They're no longer focusing on purely sales of expensive phones. We're looking at now a shift towards subscription services, continued money coming in from the consumer to Apple, not just a one-time purchase. So hopefully that was interesting for you guys. I thought that it was interesting, especially considering the concept of a tipping point, that they're changing their strategy as far as marketing and how they are going to be interacting with their consumers. It's going to be a little bit different if this is correct. So up next, after this next commercial break, we want to talk about Microsoft. Microsoft is making big moves, you guys. Microsoft plans to be carbon negative by the end of the decade. So hang tight after the commercial break. We will explain what that means and how they're going to do it.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Welcome back. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Maya, and we just went over some information regarding the next iPhone releases. Potentially the most exciting one, if you're looking for the hottest up-and-coming brand new item, might be the iPhone 12. However, if you're looking for something that is a little bit more budget-friendly and potentially equally exciting, then there is the iPhone SE 2, which is an extension of the iPhone 8. Now, all of this does indicate a change in strategy from Apple, as we said, moving towards subscription services and away from expensive one-time purchases. So that being said, we are moving forward now into some projections coming out of Microsoft. Microsoft has announced that they plan to be carbon negative by the end of the decade. That's by 2030. So what does this mean to be carbon negative, and why is it so important? And how are they anticipating that they're going to be able to accomplish this? It's a really, really big goal. Even reducing carbon footprint is a big goal, but being carbon negative is incredible. So let's take a look at what that means and how they're going to make it happen. So first I want to talk about the significance of the carbon footprint. So essentially, human activity has been releasing incredible amounts of greenhouse gases into the Earth's atmosphere. When we talk about greenhouse gases, we are talking about gases that are emitted from the ground level, and then they produce what they call a greenhouse effect, where the gas will warm up, move towards the outer edge of the atmosphere, not escape the atmosphere, bounce back down, and then continue to move around a lot within the atmosphere, creating extra energy and extra heat. So that's the very, very, very basic description of what a greenhouse gas is. 75% of greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide. And the majority of the carbon dioxide that has been released into the atmosphere has taken place since the 1950s, whereas the 2 trillion metric tons of greenhouse gases that we have released due to human activity has started somewhere around the time of the Industrial Revolution of the mid-1700s. So that means that recently, within the past 70 years, we have been seeing a huge influx of carbon dioxide release. And it can take thousands of years to reverse the effects of excess carbon dioxide. So the ultimate goal for humanity at this point, from a scientific or climate perspective, is to try to remove as much carbon dioxide as we create every year in order to achieve what they call a net zero. So how is Microsoft going to do this? Because they're not just saying that they're going to achieve a net zero within the company. They want to be carbon negative, which means that they are not just, breaking even. They're actually removing more carbon from the atmosphere than they're putting in. So this is a really audacious claim. And not only are they planning to be carbon negative by the year 2030, 10 years from right now, but they have also claimed on the Microsoft blog that they also want to remove from the environment all, I'm quoting the blog right now, quote, all the carbon the company has emitted either directly or by electrical consumption since it was founded in 1975. End quote. And wow, that is a huge goal. And they want to accomplish this by the year 2050. That is 30 years to remove all of the carbon the company has emitted either directly or by electrical consumption since 1975. So they not only want to be carbon negative, but they want to completely erase all of the damage that they have done. So their stance on this is basically that everyone should be putting some kind of effort in towards doing the right thing. But what they say is that those who have the means to do more should do more. And so since they believe that they have the means to do more, they're really taking major strides in order to be one of the forefront leaders as far as going green and doing what you can for the environment. And this is really awesome because it's coming from such a huge company. Coming from Microsoft really sets the precedent and sets a standard for other companies and says, hey, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. So here's how it's going to happen. So first, one of the ways that Microsoft has proposed that they're going to do this is by categorizing the different kinds of emissions that they contribute to. According to them, scientists account for carbon emissions by classifying them into 3 categories or scopes. So scope 1 emissions are emissions that are directly created by activities done by that business. So transportation or production, any emissions that are a direct result of that company's production is scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 are indirect emissions that come from electricity or heating and energy sources and such that the business uses. Things that you may consider like they go towards the overhead cost of the business, right? And then scope 3 emissions are indirect emissions that are incorporated through all other activities that are involved with the business. So this can be a really extensive list on scope 3. But what Microsoft is intending to do is kind of phase things out, starting with scope 1 and then scope 2 and then scope 3 emissions so that they not only take account for what their business produces, but for all of the activities that are surrounding and incorporated with Microsoft's operations. So by the year 2025, Microsoft is looking to shift towards 100% renewable energy supplies. So this means that they'll be contracting with renewable energy sources, renewable energy companies, green energy companies, we might say, so that all of their energy is coming from renewable energy sources. Then they're also pursuing International Living Future Institute Zero Carbon Certification and LEED Platinum Certification for all of their campuses in order to meet regulations that certify them for certain standards of green activity. Now, on their blog, they do specify, quote, like most carbon neutral companies, Microsoft has achieved carbon neutrality primarily by investing in offsets that primarily avoid emissions instead of removing carbon that has already been emitted, end quote. Now, as far as the goal towards 2050, the goal that is to remove all of the carbon that they have put into the atmosphere, I don't see a whole lot of explanation as far as how they're going to do this, but we do need to move on to the next segment, and there's so much that Microsoft has planned out in order to make this happen, and they really are trying to lay it all out on the ground for us so that they can set the standard. They have a very detailed plan, it looks like, put in place in order to accomplish their goals, and I really applaud them for this endeavor that they're embarking on, because it's a really big deal. And I think that just the fact that Microsoft is the one to start doing this, Microsoft has been a pioneer in the technological industry since it was invented. So for them to be at this point one of the pioneers towards environmentalism and just pushing towards just generally doing the right thing. I know that this can be a touchy subject and some people are really not into the climate deal, but it doesn't matter which way you feel about it, honestly, because whether or not you believe in it, it still can be seen as the right thing to do. When you have the power to either do the right thing or not do the right thing, and you are such a big company like Microsoft, just the fact that they are choosing to move in the right direction because they have the means to do it, I think that says a lot about them, no matter what your stance is on climate change. So just the fact that they are moving towards doing healthier things for the planet, healthier things for the environment, it's good for all of the consumers, and I think it's going to be good for them as a company. So I'm proud of them for doing this, and we'll look forward to how well they do as far as performance and how strict they are on sticking with this timeline, because it is a pretty aggressive timeline as far as attacking the issue of carbon dioxide emissions. So we'll take a look at it a little while down the road and see how well they're doing with it. So that is everything I've got on Microsoft for right now. We do have one more commercial break coming up here. And when we get back, I want to touch on a topic that we discussed a little bit in the last episode, which is Boeing's 737 Max Jetliner, which took a big hit after a couple of incidents that happened last year. And now we have a little bit of news from Boeing as a report defends the jetliner. So we'll look into that a little bit after the commercial break. Hang tight with us and we will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Maya. Thank you so much for listening into the show today. So we just went over some information about Microsoft regarding their goals to become carbon negative by the end of the decade and to take it even a step further and eliminate all of the carbon emissions that Microsoft has put into the atmosphere since the founding of the company. So really big goals in place for Microsoft. I applaud them and I hope that they're able to accomplish everything that they're setting out to achieve. So moving forward, I want to discuss a little bit about Boeing's 737 Max Jetliner. So this particular airplane has come under quite a bit of scrutiny to the point of being discontinued, if you will, following a couple of plane crashes that took place with this particular airplane, excuse me. There was one crash in 2018 and one in 2019. Following those two crashes, which took place in Ethiopia and Indonesia, following those two crashes, last week we talked about the firing of the former CEO of Boeing. He has since then been replaced, but now we are looking at a report that has come out actually defending Boeing's 737 Max Jetliner. It looks like the report is essentially saying that it was actually thorough work. That is the quote from the report. It says that it was actually thorough work done by aviation professionals, and that they believe that it was actually produced well. However, there were several comments that were made as far as how they could improve within the company. So among the recommendations for the FAA, there was a couple of things listed. First was to extend the requirement for the safety management systems. As far as the airlines and airports go, the FAA is already requiring safety management systems to be put in place, but they want this system to also be implemented and put in place for the design and manufacturing organizations. Essentially, they think that the design and manufacturing of the 737 Max Jetliner is what contributed to or potentially caused these two crashes, and so they want to take a much closer look at design and manufacturing. They also want the company to do a better job with gathering, analyzing, and accessing aviation data so that committees are able to review processes like this, which kind of reveals to us that potentially there was a little bit of disorganization, perhaps, or perhaps a little bit of concealment of information. We don't know. If it was requested that they do a better job gathering data, that sounds like something that should be relatively easy for a well-structured company to do, is to gather their own data. But if this is becoming a challenge, then that raises some questions. They would also like for Boeing to reevaluate and bolster the workforce, which includes, quote, an aggressive recruitment campaign to encourage students to pursue careers at the FAA, end quote. So it looks like we are hoping to introduce new, fresh minds into the FAA and encourage people to hire those people who are willing to put in the extra hours, willing to put ambition and energy and motivation and drive into the FAA to ensure that we don't have things like this coming up again. Now, what was kind of interesting about this report was that it did not necessarily specify anything about who can evaluate companies or individuals. So there were some concerns that essentially Boeing had been responsible for reviewing the changes to the 737 MAX, which it produced itself. So what they want to happen instead of Boeing reviewing its own design, is to have an outside entity come in and take a look at the design and ensure that it meets certain standards. Instead of having Boeing set the rules for itself, they want to have essentially a checks and balances system to ensure that there's more than one system in place to make sure that we don't have accidents like this again, because bottom line is something went wrong in the design process and something went wrong with the delivery of these airplanes to where hundreds of people were killed. And it was unnecessary. So there are several things being put in place in order to ensure that things like this don't happen again. It looks like not only Boeing, but also the FAA is under scrutiny, and there are going to be changes made in order to ensure that we don't see something like this happening again. I really hope that they are very thorough and very detailed and strict with their enforcement of these recommendations and whatever else they have in place in order to ensure that we have higher quality standards amongst aviation. So that'll wrap up our story on Boeing for today. We do have a commercial break to take, and when we get back, I want to talk about Bose. Bose is probably a very popular name that you've heard a lot. My very first car was a 2008 Volkswagen EOS, and it came fully equipped with Bose stereo systems, and I was so excited about it. Very happy to have Bose in my car. But it looks like Bose is struggling a little bit, so when we come back from the commercial break, we'll talk about the struggles that Bose is undergoing and how that reflects the market in general, and follow up a little bit from some discussion that we had last week in regards to a very similar topic. So hang tight, and right after the commercial break, we will be back to talk about Bose and reflect on Macy's as well.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Maya. Thank you guys for hanging in with me today and listening to all of our multiple stories going on. So we just got done talking a little bit about a report that came out that defended Boeing's 737 Max Jetliner production, and actually said that the aviation engineers and those who worked on the development of the 737 actually did some pretty thorough work, but it looked like they had some further criticisms of the organizational systems, the data gathering and implementation, and had some recommendations as far as future hires. So we looked at that a little bit just a moment ago. And coming up next, I want to talk about Bose. Bose is well known for their excellent quality sound systems, and they've been around for quite some time. Now, last episode with me, we talked about the closure of 28 Macy's locations and one Bloomingdale's location. And we kind of talked about how that was a major thing, not only for Macy's, but just for the industry as a whole, and not even just the industry, but shopping as a concept. It has changed so substantially over the course of just my lifetime. For example, over the last couple of decades, we've seen a huge shift in how people shop, how they purchase items, how they even look for items. It's pretty infrequent at this point for someone to intend to buy something without first Googling it or looking it up on the internet in some fashion. There are so many ways now to shop and purchase items and services without even setting foot outside of your bedroom if you don't want to. You can actually stay in bed and order yourself a Bose sound system online. You can do that on a multitude of websites or through Bose website themselves. Now, that being said, it looks like Bose is actually taking a pretty big hit. Now, as far as the impact of these closures in comparison to those of Macy's, I don't know. But what we do know is that Bose is closing over 100 physical store locations around the globe. 100 locations is kind of a big deal and something to take a look at. Now, last week we talked about this with Macy's and kind of just considered, is this something that's particular to Macy's? Or is it just department stores overall? And we concluded that department stores had been certainly taking a hit, but it appeared that Macy's in particular was taking a larger hit than the others were. So, and maybe not all others, but Macy's certainly was suffering a little bit. So now we want to take a look at Bose. Is this something that's particular to Bose? I mean, obviously we see a lot of store closures all around the place. Even just here locally in my city here in Dallas, we see a lot of malls going down in the Metroplex. We see a lot of stores closing, and just a lot of physical locations are struggling to keep up with the market just because it's so competitive online. And it looks like that's really what's going on with Bose as well, is that the online digital market is becoming so strong that they just don't have the necessity for a physical location anymore. Thankfully, in a statement produced by Bose themselves, it looks like Bose isn't necessarily suffering from the shift to online shopping. In fact, it seems that they're maintaining quite well their sales and profits. So Bose is doing quite well. It just looks like they don't need physical locations anymore. And that's kind of the way that they phrased it. So they're actually going to be closing precisely 119 retail stores across the world, which includes locations in North America, Japan, Australia, and Europe. However, we meaning Bose, will still be operating about 130 stores that are located throughout China, the United Arab Emirates, India, and a handful of Asian countries as well. So they are maintaining a couple of stores, but I mean 119 closing with 130 remaining is huge. However, Bose says that they do have a significant amount of sales online, which is good, and they also don't necessarily need to have their own retail locations. It's actually very easy to find Bose products in lots of other stores, anywhere that you can buy electronics like Best Buy or Target or anything like that. Bose is everywhere. So it makes sense that they don't necessarily need retail locations anymore because it's just one of those companies that is all over the place. And in fact, when I first think of buying something produced by Bose, I wouldn't even consider that there may be a Bose location. I don't think that I've actually ever even encountered a Bose location or a Bose retail store, at least not one that I noticed and logged in my memory. So that just lets you know that even without having been to a Bose retail location, I know about the companies, still would purchase their items, etc. So they don't need those locations in order to keep up. They also noted a little bit as far as the loss of employees. They didn't necessarily make a statement as far as how many people are going to be losing jobs as a result of the closures, but they did note that at least the company's employees will be receiving reasonable severance packages. So we have that at least to count on them, that they are hopefully treating their employees rightly. So like we said, this is really just reflective of the retail industry as a whole. This is not just a Bose thing or a Macy's thing. This is an everybody thing. The closures that are going on with Bose are really just mirroring what's going on with the rest of the industry. In 2019, it looks like about 9,302 United States retail stores closed, which was a 59% increase in closures from the previous year. So that's a really big deal. That's a lot of retail stores closing, and a 59% jump is huge. So we can see that this digitalization of shopping and interaction with each other is having a huge impact on how the industry operates. Currently, online sales make up around 16% of all sales retail right now. And it's predicted by UBS analysts that this number will rise up to about 25% by 2026. So that's pretty substantial. We're looking at by 2026 up to 75,000 more retail stores closing in the United States. So we can just continue to predict that shopping is going to become more and more digital. It is not going to bounce back as far as physical retail locations are concerned, but we can definitely look forward to more digital marketing, more digital sales, and a lot more influence via social media and other online platforms. So definitely if you are somebody coming out of school, looking at going into school, etc., and you are looking into going into the retail sector, perhaps you might take a look at how retail is moving into a digital market and how that could affect your potential job opportunities, and maybe some new opportunities that you could take advantage of as far as online marketing and business through digital means. So that'll wrap up our story on Bose for today. We do have one final commercial break for you guys, and when we get back, I want to talk a little bit more about digital stuff since it's kind of been a little bit of a theme for today's episode. And we are going to talk about robots being added to the workforce in Walmart. So hang tight after the commercial break, and we will be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. You are listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. For the last time today, my name is Maya. Thank you so much for listening into the show today. I really appreciate you all being here, and I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've been through today. There are so many interesting things going on in the world, and honestly, this doesn't even touch on everything that we could be talking about. I do encourage you guys to follow us on social media so that you can keep up with any other insights, stories, news, progress that's going on in the world, because we are going to stay on top of it online, just in the spirit of keeping up with all of this digitalization of the world. So follow along with us, and I would love to hear back from you guys. So we just followed up on Bose and the closure of 119 locations of Bose retail locations. So now we want to move forward into, again, more digital news, essentially. Walmart is adding robots to 650 more locations globally to enhance productivity. Now, last week, we talked a little bit about robots in the workplace, but we were not really talking about robots. We were talking about robotics, and that was a little bit different. So we talked about UiPath and how these robotics are going to increase productivity and enhance efficiency in the workplace, but that was a completely different kind of robot, right? We're looking there at more of an application that creates like shortcuts and such, so that when you operate a computer, you can minimize the amount of busy work and tedious little tasks that have to be done on the computer in order to get from point A to point B and to get things done. But that is a completely different thing from what Walmart is doing. So when we talked about UiPath last week, I told you guys that when I first heard about having robotics in the workplace, in my head I thought about, they talked about, we want to have every worker have a bot. And I thought, that's so cute. They're going to have little robot assistants who get them coffee and throw away their trash and and just, file paperwork and shred things for them. But I was completely wrong, and after further research, we clarified what exactly they were doing with UiPath. However, Walmart seems to be following at least a little more closely to what my initial mental image was of what a robot in the workplace looks like. So with Walmart, they actually do utilize physical robots, not application type of robotics, but robots, mostly in the warehouse setting in order to help with distribution, shipping, packaging, etc. But they have physical robots who go in and help with assembly and all sorts of things. And these already exist in hundreds of Walmart locations, but now they're adding robots to 650 more locations in order to enhance productivity and get rid of those little menial tasks that people have to do. Now, once again, last week when we talked about robotics, we touched on the topic of job loss as a result of, I don't want to say artificial intelligence because this really isn't artificial intelligence, but as a result of more technology and more robotics and robots and whatnot being added to the workplace, there's a lot of fear around this topic as far as job loss goes. Now, it looks like in Walmart, we are seeing a very similar thing as we saw last week with UiPath working together with GE, with General Electric, and we are not seeing a loss of jobs in Walmart. In fact, Walmart has been one of the leading companies this last year in increasing employment. Walmart's done a great job with that. So with the addition of robotics, we are not eliminating people, and we're not eliminating or even decreasing the need for physical human beings to be in the workplace. We still need the people, but we are just able to get more things done in a day by introducing these robots into the workplace. Like we said last week, it's so uncommon to finish up the workday and feel like you actually got everything done that you needed to do. Now, perhaps with the addition of these new technologies, we can actually get done what we need to do in the day and move forward with new projects. So, and also with the addition of robots, we have, similar to the systems at GE with UI and UiPath, when in Walmart, when you start to introduce robots into the workplace, you have to have a whole support team. You have to have teams of mechanics, teams of engineers, teams of people who know how to code and work with these machines. And so in essence, you're really adding a whole new element, a whole new kind of person, an entire team of people who is going to support and maintain these robots in order to add to the productivity. So once again, I just want to reiterate, when we have the addition of robotics and robots in the workplace, I think there has been a lot of fear about this, that there's going to be no more need for human activity and human involvement in the workplace, and that simply isn't true. The implementations of robotics and robots that we've seen has not had that effect. It has simply changed the way that we work. It's changed the way that we need physical work, and it's changed the types of work that is needed. So now we need people who understand robotics and robots and can help us out with these systems. So this is the conclusion of today's show on business news. I'm so thankful that you guys stuck with me for this show. I really hope that you're enjoying the rest of the information that's going into it. And if you have any feedback for us, again, I would love to hear from you guys. Please leave comments on the show. Thank you so much for listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast. Again, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and also write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
You've been listening to the GSMC Business News Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.